Hello, I'm very happy and honoured to be part of this Friends in Faith presentation. My name is Father John Collins. I'm the pastor at St. Felicitas and Perpetua Parish in San Marino. I will be ordained 27 years this coming June and have served all of these years here in the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. You may detect an accent. You don't need to adjust your screen in any way. I did live in Ireland for a number of years before coming here to the United States. So I grew up in a typical Irish Catholic family. Faith just was part of everything that we did. I have two sisters. They're twins, 2 years younger than me. So we would go to Mass every weekend with our parents. In those days, you weren't allowed colouring books and bags of Cheerios to distract a child. So I'm not quite sure how they kept us quiet in the pew, but somehow they did. But probably like most kids, I was restless and probably even bored at some occasions during Mass. But there was always, I can't remember how early the memory is, but there was always a point in Mass that got my attention. It was the bells ringing, because something very special was about to happen. And I do even recall my mother would be telling me that, Holy God is here now, and then I would just watch as the priest held the host. I had no idea in the world what was actually happening, but at that moment seemed to be very significant because everyone was kneeling down and just staring straight ahead, and everyone was so quiet that I just knew if I made a sound, I'd be in serious trouble. So there was something from my earliest memories of the moment of consecration at Mass and watching the priest elevate the host that kind of always struck me as something just truly significant. And then just kind of over the years as a teenager, I would attend Mass and I took more interest in learning more about Mass. I couldn't wait to make First Communion. That was like the greatest thrill and joy because I was about to actually get to receive this host that I'd only been able to look at up until then. And then, of course, becoming an altar server was also something incredible because I was, for want of a better expression, close to the action. I was able to be, see that host even much closer when I was up beside the priest. And the days I got to ring the bells, that was even more incredible because I knew I was getting everyone's attention, which again was very important to me at the time. I never really gave priesthood a thought, just growing up. As a teenager, I was involved in my parish in a youth group, and a couple of times the pastor had, mentioned it to me, have you ever thought about being a priest? And it was no, definitely not. But it wasn't until my final year in high school that I actually gave it more serious consideration, and then did meet with the vocation director. And so eventually, anyhow, I did become a priest. Took a little bit of a journey from Ireland to Los Angeles, and won't go into all the details, but I believe that the Lord had his hand very much in the path that I'd chosen and the people that he put on that path to get me to where I am today. So for that, I'm most grateful. Celebrating Mass for a priest is, I think, the highlight and privilege of our day. And of course, there's many things we do. And I believe priesthood is it's a true call to service. But the service that we're called to can only become, I think, authentic and real because of the Eucharist, because of our celebration of Mass and because of the grace we receive through the reception of the body and blood of Christ. It gives us that humility that we're called to have in service each and every day. And again, the longer I've been doing this, the more I've begun to respect and appreciate that. One of the things I did, it's a good number of years ago now, I was asked in another parish if I would do what was called a slow motion Mass. Never heard of it. And somebody had attended one somewhere else, so they said, why don't you just, look into it and check it out? So I did. And I kind of adapted it a little bit to kind of fit kind of the needs of our community. But it was a full celebration of Mass, but the only way I can describe it as, we do a section of Mass, and if I had a remote control in my hand, I'd hit pause. And then we'd discuss what happened and explain what happened before we would go on to the next part of Mass. The comments I heard every time I've done that was, I have been a Catholic my entire life, and I've learned more about Mass this evening than I've ever knew before, and all the Masses I've attended. So certainly help people in their appreciation of Mass, which I think is really important, because it is the source and summit of our, Christian life. And, to hear people say, I don't go anymore, I'm bored. I remember reading, if the Son of God, the creator of the universe, bores you, I'm not sure what is ever going to entertain you, because when you are at Mass, God is present. And that is one thing that the last number of years I've read more times than I care to, the number of Catholics today that do not believe in the real presence. I think that's sad and tragic, because this is an incredible gift that we have, the gift of God himself. I mean, what more could we hope for? What more could we ask for? Jesus making himself present. There's a gospel in particular that I like to reflect upon. It's John chapter 14, verses 1 to 6. The setting is the Last Supper, and there is Jesus with the disciples sharing that meal together, and they're having a conversation. The disciples are probably very relaxed and enjoying the time with Jesus. But Jesus knew what was going to happen that night. He knew that shortly after dinner, guards were going to come and falsely accuse him. He would be arrested, he would be beaten, and within 24 hours, he would be executed on a cross like a criminal. And he knew that those remaining hours with the disciples were critical. Everything he did, everything he said, was of the utmost importance, not just for them, but for the future of the church, for you and I, to this very, very day. And the message of the Last Supper continues to be as relevant today as it was some 2,000 years ago. And remind ourselves that at that meal, that is when Jesus instituted the Eucharist. He gave us the gift of his body and blood to feed on, to be nourished by, so that we could continue to live our faith and follow the example that he set for us, the example that he set that night at the Last Supper when he washed the feet of his disciples, an example of service, which we're all called to. What is important to understand is when we celebrate Mass, it's not a reenactment of a historical event. Mass was done once and for all, one sacrifice by Jesus. So every time we celebrate Mass together, believe it or not, we actually have an experience of time and eternity rolling into one. We are at the Last Supper. We are at Calvary. We are at the empty tomb. That's what Mass allows you and I to experience. So it's so important to understand that Jesus truly is present in the Eucharist. That is the gift that he gave us. And that it's something that we should make sure is always central to our lives each and every day. Have a couple of experiences that I've had during my years as a priest. One was many years ago celebrating Mass. It was a weekday Mass in a parish. And it was around the consecration time. I remember being at the altar. And there was a mother with her daughter attending Mass. They were sitting maybe 4 or 5 pews back. So the little girl was possibly 4 years of age. And during the words of consecration and the elevation of the host, the little girl started shouting, "Mommy, look at the angels, look at the angels." And I kind of just looked over toward her. And in that moment, she was pointing directly at the altar and where I was standing. And then the same thing happened during the elevation of the chalice. And I kind of got a little, almost a shiver on my back in that moment. But I was reminded of an old prayer book that I had seen several years ago that had illustrations of the Mass just in black and white. And there was one very powerful illustration that had a priest standing at an altar celebrating Mass. And as he was holding up the host like that in his hand, there was angels all around him holding up the edges of his vestments. That child could see what I couldn't see. but I believed that you could see what was actually there. And that is what happens at every Mass, and we believe that as part of our faith, that the angels of God are around the altar at all times. Second experience I had was with a group of teenagers from a parish where we had gone on a retreat several years ago to San Diego. And during that retreat in the evening, the Blessed Sacrament was on the in the monstrance on the altar for exposition and adoration. And then eventually one of the priests taken the monstrance down through the assembly, just walking through. And the teenagers got very emotional. A lot of them started crying. Some of them all of a sudden started laughing with the gift of laughter. It was an unusual experience for everyone present. And there was one young teenager who was standing near me who honestly got totally freaked out by what was happening. And I just remember grabbing onto my arm and would not let go. I said, I will have bruises in the morning. But he didn't know what was happening. And I said, it's okay. I said, it's okay. It's just Jesus. I said, don't worry about it. So by the time the Blessed Sacrament got over near where we were standing, at this point, he had literally collapsed onto the floor and he was in sobs of tears. When it was over, he didn't speak. So eventually I kind of moved him aside and I asked him, how are you feeling? And all he could say was, wow. I said, but how do you feel? Wow. And he said it a third time. And there wasn't another word that he was capable of saying. And then I began to realize there was no need for another word. I don't know how many of you have ever been to benediction. There's a beautiful traditional hymn we sing at benediction called the Tantum Ergo. And there is this line in there, we usually sing it in Latin. The line is, Prestet fides supplementum, sensuum defectui, which translates in English, let our faith supply conviction where the senses tire and fail. There are many times when our senses will tire and fail, but our faith will always be strong, and our faith will keep giving us that conviction that we need to truly believe in the Lord. And it is our faith that will allow you and I, in those moments of grace, when we encounter Christ in the Eucharist, to just say wow. And that wow speaks 1,000 volumes. Thank you.